Hello and welcome to the First Love Project podcast. I'm Dr. Jori Schaefer, the show's host and creator, and it is my joy and pleasure to welcome you back today. If you're a returning listener, welcome anew. If this is your first time here, I am so thankful that you've stopped in. I continue to pray for all of you that the Lord would draw you closer to Him and give you more of a desire to know Him and to know His Word. And I pray that you'll be very intentional about your time with Him. Friends, we must be intentional about spending time with Him. He's been so gracious to give us His Word. And that is one of the things behind this First Love Project is to encourage us to know more of Him by being in His Word. And we see His character, we see His grace, we see His love, we see His mercy all throughout the pages of Scripture from Genesis to Revelation. And so I wanted to do this little short daily reflection to help us all be reminded about that. And also just to show you that you can see in all the parts of Scripture. There's no part of Scripture that we need to ignore. Even though some of it may be hard to understand, we know that all Scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, correction, reproof, and training in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, equipped for every good work. So I'm so glad that you're here. Well, where we find ourselves today on this 104th episode of the First Love Project is we are in Second Kings. So this is a Saturday, and it is Saturday the 25th of April. And on Saturdays, we look at the history parts of Scripture. Now, there's no doubt that there's history in the law, there's history in the Gospels, but there is a section of the Old Testament especially that is known as the Old Testament history. And where it picks up is as the children of Israel are leaving the wilderness, they've wandered there for 40 years under the leadership of Moses. They're getting ready to finally cross into the promised land. And that, when they cross over, that begins their history. And it talks a lot about the history of their leaders, how they acted as they crossed over, what God did for them. And so we're in that book of Second Kings today. And I call this grace in the remembering when we look at the history, because a lot of times we can look back at our history, at other history. We're able to see how things happened, and we can truly see God's grace in the pages of His history books. And so I just love that. But remember that the Old Testament history starts with the book of Joshua, then it goes to Judges, then to Ruth, then to 1st and 2nd Samuel, then 1st and 2nd Kings, then 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and then Ezra and Nehemiah. 1st and 2nd Samuel really pick up as the judges are no longer really going to be leading the children of Israel, and the people cry out for a king, and God has Samuel to anoint King Saul. So most of First Samuel talks a lot about Saul and a little bit about David. Saul was disobedient, and God told Samuel to anoint David. And so we see a little bit about that in First Samuel, but a lot of that in Second Samuel. We'll see about King David. And then King David's son Solomon would be the one to succeed him. And so we see that really in First Kings all the way through up about half of First Kings. And then you start to see that the kingdom of Israel was split between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And from then on, we will see the Second Kings mention about kings of the northern kingdom, kings of the southern kingdom. First and Second Chronicles are a retelling of a lot of these same things, but they mostly deal with the southern kingdom of Judah. But where we find ourselves today is in Second Kings, and at this time, Elisha is the prophet. Remember, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, how God spoke to His people through the prophets. And Elisha came after Elijah. And so I want you to hear this grace in the remembering here. So let's pick up about in this account of Elisha and the widow's oil, and we'll see that in 2 Kings beginning in chapter 4, verse 1. It says, "Now the wife of one of the sons of the prophets cried to Elisha, 'Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord. But the creditor has come to take my 2 children to be his slaves.' And Elisha said to her, 'What shall I do for you? Tell me, what have you in the house?' And she said, 'Your servant has nothing in the house except a jar of oil.' Then he said, 'Go outside, borrow vessels from all your neighbors, empty vessels and not too few, Then go in and shut the door behind yourself and your sons and pour it into all these vessels. And when one is full, set it aside. So she went from him and shut the door behind herself and her sons. And as they poured, they brought the vessels to her. When the vessels were full, she said to her son, "Bring me another vessel." And he said to her, "There is not another." Then the oil stopped flowing. She came and told the man of God, and he said, "Go sell the oil and pay your debts, and you and your sons can live on the rest." Oh, friends, there are so many things that we see here. But when I think about grace and the remembering, part of what we do as believers in God, believers in Jesus, is He has been so gracious to show us how He is faithful. He's shown it in the lives of his people. He's shown it in his word. This lady, this widow, knew that Elisha was a man of God. She knew that Elisha had that connection with God. And remember, like we talked about before, at that time, not everybody could just talk to God whenever they wanted to. And they had to have a priest or a prophet or a mediator. But she knew that if she cried out to the man of God, that go between, she had faith. I truly believe that he could help. And so he told her what to do. And it had to take faith for her to tell her son to go do what Elisha said, to go borrow all those vessels, those empty vessels from the neighbors. But you see what happened? Before she had the oil, before it happened, Elisha said, "You go get ready, go get all these vessels and come back and then you start pouring that oil." And God blessed that faith. And it wasn't a faith in a man. You know, a lot of us now will, or you'll see in this world today how people have faith in the person. But I truly believe she knew that this man, Elisha, had that connection with God. And she knew that if Elisha said it or asked it, she had faith that it would happen, that God would make it happen. And that is really what happened. You know, for us now, though, we don't have to have a mediator or as far as a human mediator. We who are believers, because of what Jesus has done for us, because he has made a way, we can go boldly before that throne of grace in our time of need. And I love that we see how it was in the Old Testament, and then it's so much grace. There's grace in the remembering. We see how it used to be, and now we know how it is on this side of the cross. So know that you can go and ask in your time of need. God already knows what we need, and he is so gracious. I love this account, but I love that it reminds us about our gracious, loving, caring God. And may we give him the thanks and praise for that. Blessings to you, friends. Until next time.